Before the noise of cars, before glowing screens, before time felt rushed, there was a small American town where nothing unusual happened, and yet life passed slowly. Tonight we are not visiting great battles or famous speeches. We are simply stepping into an ordinary day in a 19th century American town where hours moved gently and silence was part of daily life. Before the town wakes, there is a long moment when it does not yet belong to anyone. No voices claim it. No footsteps hurry through it. The streets exist only as streets, quiet and patient, waiting to be used. In the early hours of a 19th century American town, the day begins without ceremony. There is no clock chiming loudly to announce the morning. There are no engines starting, no electric lights flickering on. Instead, the transition from night to morning happens slowly, almost without notice, as if time itself is unsure whether it is ready to move forward. A pale fog rests low over the unpaved streets, settling into the shallow ruts left by wagon wheels from the day before. It drifts gently, not moving with purpose, but shifting when the air cools or warms by a fraction. Wooden storefronts stand closed, their windows dark, their signs hanging still. Painted letters, faded by sun and rain, spell out names of trades that will not begin their work for several more hours. The town is quiet enough that small sounds feel larger than they are. Somewhere a loose shutter taps softly against a frame, moved by a light breeze. Far off, a rooster calls once, then falls silent again, as if reconsidering the effort. These sounds do not break the quiet, they become part of it. Most of the houses are still asleep. Curtains remain drawn, doors are closed and unlatched only from within. Inside, families lie under heavy blankets, their breathing slow and even. There is no sense of urgency to wake. The sun has not yet made its appearance, and until it does, the town feels suspended in a space between one day and the next. The streets themselves seem wider at this hour. Without people, wagons, or animals, the open space stretches out, uninterrupted. Boardwalks along the main road wait in silence, their wooden planks cool with dew. A thin layer of moisture coats everything, softening edges and dulling colors. The town looks less defined, as if it has not fully decided what shape it will take today. At the edge of town, where fields begin and buildings thin out, the fog is thicker. Fence posts disappear into it, one by one, until only the nearest remain visible. Beyond them, the land is present but unseen. It exists as a memory rather than a sight, known only because it was there yesterday and will be there again when the fog lifts. This quiet is not empty. It is simply unused. In the 1800s, small American towns often began their days this way, without spectacle or noise. There were no morning announcements, no shared signals that it was time to begin. Each household followed its own internal rhythm, guided by habit more than by clocks. The town did not wake all at once. It woke in pieces. A single lamp still burns in a window near the center of town. Inside, someone has risen earlier than most. Perhaps it is a baker, beginning the slow process of preparing dough. Or perhaps it is a shopkeeper, awake not because of need, but because sleep
has ended naturally. From the street, there is no way to know. The light is steady and unremarkable, offering no clues. The buildings of the town are simple, built for function rather than display. Wood is the most common material, cut from nearby forests and shaped by local hands. Paint is applied when it can be afforded and left to fade when it cannot. Nothing is meant to impress. Everything is meant to last as long as possible. As the minutes pass, the fog begins to thin in places, though it does not disappear entirely. It lifts slightly from the ground, revealing more of the street, more of the buildings. The sky lightens from deep gray to a softer shade, suggesting that morning is approaching, even if it has not yet arrived. A horse shifts in its stall somewhere behind a house, the sound of hooves against wood muted by distance. A dog stirs, then settles again. These movements are small and uncoordinated, not part of any larger plan. They happen simply because living things do not remain still forever. There is a sense in this hour that the town is holding its breath. The main street curves gently, following the shape of the land rather than imposing itself upon it. At this early moment, it leads nowhere in particular. Without traffic, it is just a path between buildings, between spaces. Its purpose will come later. At one end of the street, the general store stands closed, its door secured with a simple lock. Inside, shelves hold goods brought in from distant places, coffee, fabric, tools, waiting to be exchanged for coins or credit. None of that matters yet. For now, the store is just a building, quiet and dark. Nearby, the post office sits unchanged from the night before. Letters and papers, already sorted, rest in their assigned places. News from outside the town has arrived, but it has not yet been delivered. For the moment, the town remains unaware of events beyond its borders. It exists only within itself. This isolation is temporary, but in these early hours it feels complete. The church bell, if the town has one, does not ring. Bells are saved for specific purposes, services, emergencies, gatherings. Mourning does not qualify. Mourning arrives whether it is announced or not. A narrow alley between two buildings holds shadows longer than the street. Even as the sky brightens, this space remains dim, the light slow to reach it. The ground here is uneven, scattered with straw and small stones. Nothing passes through it at this hour. It is simply there, unnoticed. In the quiet, it is easy to imagine that the town could remain this way indefinitely, that no one would ever wake, that the streets would stay empty, the shops closed, the houses still. But this stillness is not permanent. It is only a pause. Inside one of the houses, a man wakes and lies still for a moment, listening. He does not hear much. That is normal. He waits until the light through the window reaches a familiar level, then sits up slowly. The day has begun for him, even if the town does not yet show it. In another house, a woman stirs, adjusting the blanket around a sleeping child. She remains in bed, not ready to rise, but aware now that morning is near. Her thoughts drift briefly to the tasks ahead, then fade again. There is time. These private awakenings happen quietly, without coordination. They do not announce themselves to the street. From outside, the town remains unchanged. The fog continues to thin. The outlines of buildings sharpen. The street gains definition. The town is slowly becoming itself again. A single set of footsteps appears, faint and measured,
Someone crosses the street, moving carefully, not wanting to draw attention or disturb the quiet. The sound is brief, then gone. Silence returns. In the distance, beyond the town, the first hint of sunlight touches the tops of trees. It does not reach the streets yet, but its presence is felt. The air begins to change, warming slightly, shifting the fog's shape. This moment before the town fully wakes is brief, but it defines the rhythm of the day that will follow. It establishes a pace that is unhurried, unforced. There is no sudden transition, no sharp divide between night and morning. One becomes the other through small, nearly invisible changes. For the people who live here, this quiet is familiar. It is not remarkable. They have known it all their lives. It is the backdrop against which everything else happens. The town does not rush into the day. It eases into it, allowing time to stretch and settle. Soon, doors will open, voices will appear, work will begin. But for now, the streets remain empty, the fog still lingers, and the town rests in a state of gentle anticipation.
Morning in a 19th century American town did not arrive with excitement. It arrived with habit. There was no sharp moment when everyone began at once. Instead, the town eased into movement through a series of small, familiar actions, repeated so often that they required little thought. These routines were not designed to save time or improve efficiency. They existed simply because they had always existed, and because no one saw a reason to change them. In many homes, the first task of the morning was the same every day. Someone rose quietly from bed and tended to the fire. If the embers from the night before had survived, they were coaxed back to life with careful movements and practiced patience. If not, the fire was rebuilt slowly, with kindling arranged just so, and a flame encouraged rather than forced. This process took time, and no one expected otherwise. The sound of a fire catching was one of the earliest signs of morning. It was a low, gentle sound, not loud enough to travel far, but meaningful within the walls of a house. Warmth began to return to rooms that had grown cold overnight. Light from the hearth spread softly, reaching corners that daylight had not yet touched. While the fire was tended, water was fetched. In towns without indoor plumbing, this meant stepping outside, even in the early hours. A bucket was carried to a well or pump, its metal cool against the hand. The air was often crisp, sometimes damp, and always quiet. Drawing water was a routine that could not be skipped. Every morning required it, regardless of weather or mood. The bucket returned heavier than it left, water sloshing gently with each step. Inside, it was set down carefully. Some of the water would be used for washing faces and hands. Some would be heated for simple cooking. None would be wasted. Washing in the morning was brief and practical. There was no long preparation, no expectation of comfort. Faces were cleaned, hands scrubbed, and hair adjusted enough to be manageable. This was not about appearance in a modern sense. It was about readiness, about beginning the day in a state that felt proper. Children woke gradually, called from sleep not by alarms but by voices. A parent's tone was steady and familiar, using the same words each morning. There was no need for variation. The children understood what was expected. They rose, dressed, and joined the household's quiet movement without protest. This was the rhythm they knew. Clothing was chosen without much thought. Most people owned only a few sets of clothes,
and the morning did not present choices so much as confirmations. Shirts were pulled on, boots laced, jackets reached for when needed. Each item bore signs of use, repairs, fading, softening from years of wear. These clothes were familiar, comfortable in their predictability. Breakfast, when it came, was simple. There were no elaborate preparations, no wide variety of options. Meals reflected what was available, what had been prepared the day before, and what could be made without effort. Bread, porridge, leftover vegetables, or salted meat appeared regularly. The food was nourishing, not exciting. Families gathered around tables that showed the marks of daily life. Scratches, stains, and uneven surfaces told quiet stories of years of use. No one commented on them. They were accepted as part of the household, as permanent as the walls themselves. Conversation during breakfast was minimal. Mornings were not a time for discussion or debate. Words were exchanged only when necessary. Plans for the day were already understood. Tasks did not need to be assigned. They were known.
Outside, the town continued its gradual awakening. Doors opened one by one. Shutters were unlatched. The first sounds of movement reached the street. Footsteps on boardwalks, a cart being pulled from a shed, the low murmur of voices greeting one another without enthusiasm or ceremony. These greetings were brief and predictable. A nod, a few words exchanged, sometimes nothing at all. People saw each other every day. There was no need for extended acknowledgement. Familiarity replaced formality. Shops did not open all at once. Each followed its own schedule, shaped by habit and necessity. A general store owner might arrive early, unlocking the door and stepping inside to prepare the space before customers appeared. Shelves were checked, counters wiped, and goods arranged as they had been arranged countless times before. The post office came to life slowly. Mail had already arrived, sorted quietly in the hours before dawn or the evening prior. Morning brought the expectation of distribution, not the excitement of arrival. Letters and papers waited patiently, their contents unknown to those who would soon receive them. For those whose work lay outside the town, mornings followed a different but equally steady routine. Farmers and laborers prepared animals and tools, checking equipment by feel as much as sight. Harnesses were adjusted, wagons inspected, and fields considered briefly, as if measuring the day ahead without calculation. These preparations were not rushed. There was no advantage to haste. Work would take as long as it took, regardless of how early it began. In homes where children attended school, the morning included a quiet readiness for learning. Books were gathered, slates checked, and simple lunches prepared. School itself was not a place of excitement. It was an extension of routine, another part of the structured day. Teachers arrived early, opening windows and arranging desks. The classroom smelled faintly of chalk and wood. Nothing about it suggested novelty. Education was approached with the same seriousness and calm as any other daily task. As the sun rose higher, the town became fully visible. Fog lifted, shadows shortened, and colors emerged more clearly. The streets filled slowly, never suddenly. Wagons rolled through at an unhurried pace. Horses moved with familiarity, guided by hands that knew their habits well. The pace of the morning remained consistent. There was no peak, no moment when activity surged. Everything unfolded evenly,
as if governed by an unspoken agreement to avoid extremes. This consistency extended to nearly every aspect of life. Morning routines did not change because change itself was unnecessary. The world these people lived in did not demand constant adaptation. Innovation came slowly, and when it did, it was often met with caution rather than enthusiasm. For many, these routines were comforting. They provided structure in a world that could be uncertain in other ways. Weather, health, and fortune were unpredictable. Morning habits were not. A woman sweeping her doorstep used the same motions she had learned years earlier. A man preparing to open his shop arranged his tools in the same order every day. These actions required no decision-making. They allowed the mind to remain calm, focused on the present moment. Even setbacks did not alter the routine significantly. A missing tool, a delayed delivery, or an unexpected visitor might slow the process, but it did not change its nature. The morning still unfolded as it always had. Time itself felt different in these hours. Without strict schedules or precise clocks, the morning expanded or contracted naturally. Tasks were completed when they were completed. No one measured progress by minutes. The day moved forward based on readiness rather than deadlines. This approach to time shaped the character of the town. It fostered patience, if not always contentment. People learned to wait, to accept delays, and to understand that most things could not be forced. As morning turned toward midday, routines shifted slightly, but their foundation remained the same. Work continued, meals were anticipated, and the day progressed without surprise. Looking back, it is easy to see these mornings as slow or eventful, but for those who lived them, they were simply normal. They had no reference point for speed or convenience. The routines of morning anchored the town. They created a shared rhythm that connected households, even when people did not interact directly. Everyone moved through the same sequence of actions, guided by the same expectations. These mornings rarely changed because there was no pressure for them to do so. They were sufficient. They worked. And in that repetition, in that quiet consistency, the town found stability. Each day began much like the one before it, not because anyone demanded it, but because no one needed it to be different.
As the mornings settled more firmly into the town, work did not begin with urgency. It began with presence. Shops, trades, and small businesses in a 19th century American town followed a rhythm that had little to do with speed. There were no grand openings, no rush of customers, no pressure to make the most of every minute. Instead, work unfolded slowly, shaped by routine, daylight, and familiarity rather than ambition. A shopkeeper unlocked his door and stepped inside, not because customers were waiting, but because it was time. The interior smelled faintly of wood, fabric, and dust, scents that never fully left the space. Sunlight entered cautiously through the front window, illuminating shelves that held the same goods they had held for years. Nothing had shifted overnight. Nothing needed immediate attention. The shopkeeper moved behind the counter and placed his hands on the worn surface, feeling the grooves left by decades of use. He did not check a clock. He did not prepare for crowds. He simply stood there for a moment, allowing the day to begin around him. Across the street, the blacksmith's shop remained quiet. Its heavy door was open, but no fire burned yet. Tools hung neatly along the walls, arranged not for display, but for habit. Each had its place, and each place had been decided long ago. When the blacksmith arrived, he did not rearrange anything. He simply reached for what he needed when he needed it. The first strike of metal against metal came later, after the fire had been built and allowed to reach the proper heat. Even then, the sound was steady rather than sharp, measured rather than loud. It carried through the street not as an announcement, but as a reminder that work had begun somewhere nearby. Other trades followed similar patterns. The tailor opened his small workspace and laid out fabric already cut the day before. Needles, thread, and scissors were placed exactly where they had been left. There was no sense of beginning from nothing. Each day picked up where the last had ended. Customers arrived slowly. They did not come in waves. One person might step into a shop, exchange a few words, make a purchase, and leave. Then there might be a long pause before the next arrival. Shopkeepers expected these pauses. They filled them with small tasks, cleaning, sorting, repairing, work that did not demand focus or haste. In the general store, goods from distant places sat quietly on shelves. Coffee beans, sugar, tools, and cloth waited to be purchased, sometimes for weeks. Their value was not measured by how quickly they sold, but by their availability when needed. The store existed to serve the town, not to impress it. Conversations inside these shops were brief and unremarkable. People spoke about weather, about the condition of roads, about small matters that did not require resolution. There was no pressure to entertain or persuade. Words were exchanged comfortably, then allowed to fade into silence. Outside, trades that required space unfolded at an equally unhurried pace. A carpenter worked on a repair, measuring and cutting wood with careful movements. There was no rush to finish. Precision mattered more than speed. Each action followed the last in a predictable sequence. The rhythm of work was interrupted only by necessity. When a tool broke, it was repaired. When supplies ran low, they were reordered or replaced when possible. These interruptions did not cause frustration. They were expected, accepted as part of the process. Small businesses in these towns rarely expanded. Growth was not the goal. Survival and stability were. A shop that served the town well had no reason to change. Success was defined by consistency rather than profit. This approach shaped the working hours of the town. Shops opened when their owners were ready and closed when the day naturally wound down. There were no extended hours to capture more customers, no special promotions to draw attention. Business followed life, not the other way around. Midday often brought a noticeable pause. Work slowed further as the heat increased and energy waned. Some shops closed briefly, others remained open but quiet, their owners resting or attending to small tasks behind the scenes. Customers understood this rhythm and did not question it. Tradespeople often worked alone or with a single assistant. Apprentices learned not through instruction alone, but through observation. They watched the repetition of tasks, the careful pacing, the patience required to do work properly. Skill developed slowly over years rather than quickly. Mistakes were part of the process. When something went wrong, it was corrected without complaint. There was no sense of failure, only adjustment. Time allowed for these corrections. The day did not punish delays. The town's economy moved at this same gentle pace. Money changed hands slowly.
Credit was extended based on trust built over time. Records were kept carefully, often by hand in ledgers that showed the steady flow of small transactions rather than dramatic gains or losses. This slowness fostered a sense of familiarity. Shopkeepers knew their customers not as sources of income, but as neighbors. Tradespeople recognized faces, remembered preferences, and worked with an understanding that relationships mattered more than efficiency. In the afternoon, light shifted through shop windows, casting long shadows across floors and counters. Dust motes drifted lazily in the air. The pace of work adjusted naturally, slowing further as the day wore on. There was no sense of closing time approaching as a strict boundary. Instead, work tapered off gradually. Fewer customers appeared, tasks were completed or set aside for the next day. The transition from work to rest was smooth and unforced. As evening neared, shops began to close one by one. Doors were locked, windows covered, and tools put away. This process followed the same routine each day, requiring little thought. The town's commercial activity did not end abruptly, it simply faded. Looking back, it's tempting to view this way of working as inefficient, but within its context, it was balanced. It matched the needs of the town and the capabilities of its people. It left room for rest, reflection, and repetition. The slow rhythm of shops, trades, and small businesses formed the backbone of town life. It provided structure without pressure, productivity without urgency. It allowed people to work without feeling chased by time. Nothing about this rhythm demanded attention. Nothing about it stood out. And yet it was this very steadiness that held the town together. Each day followed the same pattern. Each shop opened, worked, and closed in its own time. And in that quiet repetition, the town continued, one unremarkable transaction at a time. In the quiet hours of the morning, words traveled slowly through the town, measured not by importance, but by habit. Conversations unfolded without urgency. There was no rush to express an opinion, no need to persuade, no pressure to respond quickly. The town itself seemed to insist that time be taken with care. Neighbors met on the street in the soft light of dawn. Their greetings were gentle, sometimes no more than a nod or a brief word. "Good morning," one would say, and the other might return the phrase after a pause long enough to feel thoughtful. There was no hurry. There was no competition. The exchange existed simply to acknowledge presence. Inside homes, family members spoke in the same calm way. Breakfast tables hosted low voices. Children might ask a question about the weather or about a task they were expected to perform. Answers were given slowly, without inflection, without dramatic emphasis. The tone was steady, even, reassuring. Words carried information, not emotion. They were tools for understanding, not for entertainment. In shops and markets, conversation followed a similar rhythm. A customer might inquire about the price of sugar or the availability of cloth. The shopkeeper answered after a deliberate pause, considering his words, allowing the question to linger for just a moment before responding. Questions were simple. Answers were simple. There was no urgency to hurry the process. Even gossip, when it occurred, moved at this measured pace. People shared news about distant relatives or events in town, but it was done in a tone that was calm and detached. There was no excitement, no alarm, no urgency to react. Stories were recounted as though they were facts of the world, neither enhanced nor diminished by emotion. Listeners absorbed the information quietly and let it settle before responding.
Evenings carried the same calm dialogue. After a day of labor, families spoke in low voices about what had been accomplished. They shared observations about the work, about neighbors, about the town, but always without haste. Discussions were reflective. Sentences were given weight by their stillness. Words were more for thought than for action. There were moments of laughter, quiet and restrained, shared without energy or exaggeration. Humor existed in small doses, gentle enough to lighten the mood without breaking the steady rhythm of life. Conversations were soothing, almost hypnotic in their simplicity. They served to bond people without exciting them. Community meetings, when they happened, followed the same slow cadence. Town elders and officials spoke deliberately, words chosen carefully. Decisions were made with deliberation, after ample pause and consideration. There was no urgency to implement changes quickly. Each sentence was meaningful, measured, and unhurried. The meeting room itself seemed to move in time with the words, breathing in sync with the quiet voices. Visitors to the town, if they arrived, encountered this rhythm immediately. Those accustomed to hurried life found the slow pace notable. Questions were answered patiently, directions given without stress, and interactions unfolded in a calm and predictable way. The town's residents did not feel the need to impress or persuade. They only engaged with words as required, nothing more. In homes, parents guided children's conversations in this same fashion. When children expressed curiosity, answers were given slowly. Questions were sometimes repeated to ensure understanding. Children learned not only facts, but the rhythm of exchange itself, the way words could be stretched and allowed to linger, like the quiet between one step and the next on an empty street. Letters and newspapers contributed to conversations too. Reading aloud from the printed page was done with measured tone. Sentences were spaced with care. Readers allowed the words to settle into the minds of listeners before continuing. Even news from outside the town did not disrupt the calm, for the delivery itself shaped the perception of time and importance. Some tradespeople discussed their work in whispers or low tones. Instructions were repeated for clarity, each syllable deliberate.
The apprentice learned not only the tasks, but the way speech moved with action. The rhythm of labor and the rhythm of conversation were inseparable. By midday, voices on the street or in homes remained steady, unhurried. Greetings were repeated between familiar faces. Questions about the day were posed simply. Answers were careful. Conversations were a gentle background to movement, not a driver of it. Even disagreements were quiet and restrained. When opinions differed, words were chosen to acknowledge differences without escalating. Tone was flat, neutral, unexcited. The town's residents understood that calm speech maintained peace more effectively than raised voices or hasty remarks. Visitors observing these interactions would notice the pattern quickly. Every exchange had a beginning and an end, measured in quiet breaths and small pauses. Words flowed slowly, naturally, like a river untroubled by wind or stone. Nothing was urgent, yet nothing was lost. Understanding passed gently from speaker to listener. As afternoon approached, conversations at home or in shops mirrored the gradual unfolding of work. People shared news, plans, or reminders without hurry. Words had space to exist. There was room to pause and consider. Life itself seemed to dictate the pace of speech. By the time evening settled, the rhythm of the day had carried conversations through hours of calm communication. Even the smallest words felt deliberate, like part of a larger pattern repeated every day. Conversations were not intended to excite, to argue, or to impress. They existed as a steady heartbeat of the town, a quiet signal that life continued. This pattern extended to every level of town life, from children to elders, from shopkeepers to farmers. The way words were spoken reflected the pace of living. Silence between words was as important as the words themselves. Pauses allowed reflection, preparation, and consideration. Nothing was rushed, nothing was urgent. The town itself seemed to breathe with this rhythm. Voices rose and fell in time with the slow unfolding of daily tasks. People learned to expect, to trust, and to adapt to the calm cadence. Disruption was rare and noticed immediately because it contradicted the natural flow of interaction. Night arrived quietly. Conversations diminished naturally as people returned to their homes, to familiar spaces, and to routines of reflection or rest. Words lingered in the memory, soft echoes of the steady day. Conversations without urgency left space for thought, for observation, for quiet understanding of one's place in the town. Even in silence, the lessons of the day persisted. Residents understood that the absence of rush was itself meaningful. Words measured and paced had the power to maintain order, to soothe, and to connect without excitement or alarm. In a town where conversations never hurried, life was predictable, calm, and consistent. The lack of urgency did not diminish value, it enhanced it, creating a slow rhythm that matched the rhythm of work, of routine, of living. People learned the pace of speech as they learned the pace of the day, naturally, patiently, steadily. Each day, each conversation, each small exchange reinforced this pattern, and in doing so, the town maintained a quiet balance, a gentle continuity, and a peaceful flow of words that required no hurry, no excitement, no urgency at all.
By the time the sun reached its peak, the town settled into a different rhythm. The morning's gentle motion had slowed, and the streets, once dotted with quiet footsteps and measured activity, became still. The warmth of the sun hung in the air, not sharp or intrusive, but steady, persistent, enveloping everything in a soft haze that encouraged rest. Shadows shortened under the heat, stretching directly beneath the buildings and trees, as though trying to find refuge from the day. Wooden boardwalks and dirt streets absorbed the sun gradually, warming under bare feet or the hooves of horses. The town seemed to exhale, leaving the steady, deliberate motion of morning behind. Shopkeepers paused in their routines. Counters were wiped slowly, shelves straightened without hurry. Some shops closed temporarily to escape the midday warmth, their doors pulled shut against the sun's persistent glare. Behind the wooden walls, cool air lingered, offering a quiet respite from both labor and sunlight. Inside, there was no rush, only the gentle continuation of the day's work at a slower, more manageable pace. Tradespeople stepped outside briefly, wiping sweat from foreheads with cloths or sleeves. Tools rested near their workstations, unused for a few moments, as the heat reminded all that labor need not be constant. Hammers, saws, and knives rested quietly on benches and in hands that paused just long enough to feel the warmth settle into bones and muscles. The day, like a slow drumbeat, insisted on these intervals of stillness. Farmers returning from fields might stop under trees to take shade. Carts loaded with goods from distant farms moved with measured steps, not hurried by urgency. The horses that pulled them shifted lazily, nostrils flaring with each breath, occasionally flicking tails against flies, but otherwise content to remain stationary for short intervals. Even animals seemed to understand the rhythm imposed by the sun. Children, if they had been active earlier, now slowed their play. Swings moved back and forth lazily, and balls rolled gently across the dusty streets without much force. Laughter, if it arose at all, was soft, measured, fleeting. The heat demanded calm. The pause encouraged quiet observation. Even games seemed temporary, trivial, secondary to the immediate soothing stillness that had settled over the town. Inside homes, families found comfort in these slower hours. Windows were opened just enough to allow a breeze. Curtains were drawn where sunlight became too persistent. The air moved in patterns that required no effort, flowing gently through rooms filled with the familiar scents of food, wood, and daily life. Meals, if prepared at this hour, were simple: leftover bread, fruits from a garden, a small portion of cheese or cured meat were eaten slowly, without excitement, without haste. Conversations during this pause were even softer than in the morning. Words were exchanged in hushed tones. People did not speak to fill silence, but to accompany it. Questions were brief, answers concise. Discussions about the day's plans or observations were deliberate and careful, often stretching moments of speech into small pauses between thought and articulation. The heat itself seemed to enforce this lull. It was not oppressive, but it was persistent enough that people could not ignore it. Movement became purposeful, economical. No step was wasted.
Hands rested between tasks. Tools were cleaned rather than used, prepared for later labor rather than hurried to completion now. Even those eager to continue found themselves moderated by the sun's steady presence. In the streets, the rhythm of commerce adjusted. Customers arrived sporadically, and shopkeepers received them with quiet patience. Transactions that might have been brisk in the morning now unfolded slowly. Coins were counted with care. Items were exchanged deliberately, each gesture simple and precise. Words were limited, voices gentle. Every motion respected the heat and the pause it demanded. Workers on small farms adjacent to the town took advantage of this interlude. Horses were fed, water was drawn, tools cleaned. Fields were inspected, not with urgency, but with careful observation. Plants, animals, and the earth itself seemed to encourage this slower pace. Crops were tended in measured steps, hands moving deliberately to avoid haste. Even chores that would later require energy were postponed, respected as tasks better performed in a cooler part of the day.
Apprentices, young and learning trades, watched these pauses carefully. They understood that skill was not only measured by output, but by the ability to recognize moments of stillness. Learning to work steadily, to speak softly, to allow time for thought and action alike was as important as mastering any tool. The slow rhythm of midday offered lessons in patience as much as it allowed rest. In homes where laundry was done, washboards rested for a moment while water warmed by the sun or cooled in shaded buckets. The repetitive scrubbing of cloth became easier to manage in intervals, allowing both body and mind to recover between exertions. Even domestic work adopted the natural rhythm of the day, moving in sync with warmth, shadows, and the gentle hum of stillness. In communal spaces, the town's social hubs also observed the unspoken rules of the heat. Benches under trees were occupied briefly, quietly, with townsfolk sitting without conversation, sometimes merely watching dust settle or listening to distant sounds of animals. The exchange of words, when it occurred, was measured. Small talk persisted, but urgency did not. Observing, noticing, and acknowledging sufficed. The natural world itself mirrored this quiet. Birds sang less frequently, perching under leaves or atop rooftops in slow motion. Insects moved with small, deliberate steps, their wings catching light gently. Even the wind seemed to abate slightly, brushing softly over the town rather than rushing through. The town existed as part of a rhythm shared between people and nature. This pause extended to tasks less directly affected by heat. Letters were written slowly, ink flowing deliberately from pen to paper. Ledgers in shops were updated with meticulous care. Tools were sharpened methodically, each pass of metal over stone precise and careful. The value of work was measured in accuracy and steadiness rather than speed. Midday offered also a quiet opportunity for reflection. Residents might pause to look out a window, observe the patterns of life, notice the movement of wagons or animals, or consider the small details of the town that were otherwise ignored. These intervals, without pressure, without the rush of a deadline, provided space for thought that the busier parts of the day could not afford. Even minor errands were approached slowly. Deliveries between households occurred in measured steps.
Items carried were balanced, movement steady. Exchanges between people were deliberate, calm, unhurried. A package handed to a neighbor required no acknowledgement beyond a quiet nod. Words, if spoken, were minimal. Silence was equally acceptable, embraced even as part of the day's pace. In trades like blacksmithing or carpentry, tools rested during this hour. Work paused not because of incapacity, but because the heat and rhythm demanded attention be managed carefully. Fires cooled slightly. Hammers remained still. Hands that would later be busy now rested, stretching, recovering. The body moved with thoughtfulness, not urgency. Even midday prayers or spiritual observances for those inclined followed a similar pattern. Quiet reflection, soft tone, deliberate gestures. People moved through these acts without the need for spectacle or promptness. They allowed themselves to observe, to recognize, to pause. The routine of the day was as much about moderation as it was about action. By the time sunlight began to move toward the west, signaling the approach of afternoon, the town had fully absorbed this pause. The stillness, tempered by warmth and gentle rhythm, had reset energy, focus, and attention. Residents were ready, eventually, to resume the work of the day, but only at a measured, predictable pace. The midday heat, the slow rhythm of observation, the deliberate pause, these shaped not only the body, but the mind. In the town's quiet intervals, people learned patience. They understood the value of waiting, of measured action, of pacing labor to match natural conditions. The day's rhythm was established and maintained without instruction or imposition. Even when afternoon would come and labor resumed more actively, the lessons of the midday pause persisted. Movement was never rushed. Words were never urgent. Work was performed with consideration. The town's life, its small trades, and its quiet commerce all owed their steady continuity to these gentle intervals of heat and calm. Nothing about this pause was dramatic or remarkable, and yet it was essential. The town depended on these hours to maintain its balance, its steadiness, its unhurried character. Life was neither rushed nor hurried. It existed in harmony with warmth, light, and the predictable patterns of the natural world. The pause of midday reminded everyone that time could stretch, that work could be deliberate, and that life itself need not be hurried. In small towns like this one, the rhythm of heat and stillness was as important as any act of labor, shaping the day in ways that were quiet, patient, and entirely unremarkable, and in that, entirely perfect.
In small 19th century American towns, children moved through the day with a steady, predictable rhythm. Their lives were guided less by schedules imposed by distant authorities and more by the quiet expectations of family, neighbors, and the town itself. From the earliest hours of morning, children learned the gentle cadence of life, observing, mimicking, and participating in routines that had changed little over generations. The morning light fell through windows into simple bedrooms. Children rose slowly, as if the day itself allowed them time to awaken. There was no rush. Parents' voices called gently, familiar and steady, reminding children of tasks they already knew. A pair of small hands pulled blankets aside. Feet touched the floor softly. The day began quietly. Dressing was deliberate. Clothing was simple and practical, often handmade, sometimes mended countless times.
Buttons, ties, and laces required patience, yet the process was unhurried. There was no hurry to impress, no need to be the fastest. The expectation was only that clothing be complete and serviceable, ready for the day's work or study. In these moments, children learned patience, dexterity, and the value of careful preparation. Breakfast followed with similar calm. Families gathered at tables that bore the marks of generations, scratches, stains, the soft hum of daily life in their worn wood. Food was nourishing, not extravagant. Bread, butter, porridge, milk, and occasionally eggs appeared in familiar combinations. Children ate deliberately, neither rushed nor scolded. Conversation at the table remained quiet, measured, and routine. In these exchanges, they absorbed the tone of town life, soft, deliberate, and without urgency. The town schoolhouse awaited, a small building with simple wooden desks, a chalkboard, and shelves filled with slates and books. There were no bells to command attention, no loud announcements to dictate action. Instead, teachers moved with a calm authority, their presence setting expectations without raising voices. Children understood that learning required focus, patience, and quiet participation. Lessons were steady and unhurried. Reading aloud happened slowly, each word carefully enunciated. Writing exercises were performed with deliberate attention to form. Arithmetic problems were solved with methodical care, numbers traced and calculated one step at a time. Mistakes were corrected gently, allowing understanding to develop without embarrassment or rush. The pace encouraged reflection, comprehension, and a sense of quiet achievement. Recess, when it arrived, was subdued. Children played, but even games followed an unhurried rhythm. Balls rolled lazily across the dusty playground, swings moved back and forth gently. Laughter was soft, intermittent. Children learned to balance motion with stillness, action with observation. Even in play, the unspoken expectation was for moderation and awareness of others. Apprenticeship often began in parallel with formal education. Some children assisted in shops, farms, or households, learning skills directly from adults. These tasks were taught slowly, step by step. Instruction was delivered patiently. Observing adults first, practicing next, children learned that competence came through repetition, attention, and calm persistence rather than speed or pressure. Attendance was steady but not enforced with harshness. Parents and teachers alike understood that children developed at different paces. Expectations were set, yet time was flexible. Children internalized discipline through gentle guidance, absorbing lessons about responsibility, reliability, and the quiet rhythm of work. In this way, learning was integrated seamlessly into daily life rather than imposed externally. Even discipline followed the town's calm tone. Missteps were addressed without anger, using measured words that emphasized understanding over correction. Children learned the consequences of actions, the importance of listening, and the value of careful consideration. The slow, patient approach reinforced the town's overarching rhythm, shaping behavior through consistency rather than urgency. Education extended beyond reading, writing, and arithmetic. Children absorbed knowledge about the natural world, agricultural practices, crafts, household management, and local history. Lessons were integrated with observation, allowing children to connect theory with practice. This learning, though slow, was thorough, ensuring that knowledge became second nature, part of the quiet competence expected of every resident. Homework and study continued at home, often under the same calm supervision that marked all family routines. Parents offered guidance softly, demonstrating skills and reviewing lessons without pressure. Even correction was gentle. Children were encouraged to repeat exercises until understanding was secure, not until speed increased. Confidence grew alongside competence, nurtured by deliberate repetition. In the afternoons, after chores and lessons, children participated in household duties or assisted tradespeople. They carried water, tended gardens, swept floors, or helped in small workshops. Each task was performed at a measured pace. Instruction was quiet and deliberate, allowing learning through careful observation and hands-on practice. Tasks that might seem mundane to outsiders were valued as essential training for life. Conversations with adults remained deliberate. Children were encouraged to speak, but their words were weighed and considered. Listening was emphasized as much as talking. They learned that speech could be meaningful only when measured, delivered calmly, and attentive to others. Words were tools for communication and reflection, not vehicles for urgency or drama. Peer interaction followed the same measured rhythm. Friends greeted each other quietly, shared observations, or helped with tasks. Even disagreements were addressed gently, without argument or haste. Children learned negotiation, compromise, and patience naturally, without formal instruction. Social skills were intertwined with the town's overall cadence of life. Observations of adults shaped understanding of expectations. Children noted the patience of shopkeepers, the methodical movement of farmers, the careful attention of teachers. These examples provided a living curriculum in calm, deliberate action. Children absorbed the pace of the town as much as its formal lessons, internalizing rhythm, patience, and steady focus. In small towns, safety and supervision were integrated into daily routine rather than enforced through strict rules. Children moved with freedom within the bounds of familiar spaces, always aware of the expectations of adults, neighbors, and older siblings. This quiet oversight allowed independence while maintaining structure. Mistakes were corrected calmly, lessons absorbed naturally. Religious and moral instruction was part of this same measured approach. Families attended church or held quiet study at home, reading passages and reflecting on principles without urgency. Children learned values, ethics, and community standards gently as part of the ongoing flow of daily life. Reflection and understanding were emphasized over recitation or performance. Even chores like feeding animals, collecting eggs, or fetching water were conducted deliberately. Children learned responsibility, consistency, and attention to detail. Tasks were repeated daily, slowly, without pressure, embedding competence and reliability through habit rather than instruction alone. By late afternoon, children had experienced a full day of learning, play, and responsibility. The town's rhythm was internalized, the lessons of quiet expectation absorbed. Movement, conversation, work, and play had all followed the same steady cadence. Children had learned that patience, observation, and careful action were valued more than speed, drama, or immediate reward. Evening brought a wind-down period. Meals were shared quietly. Stories, if told, were gentle and reflective. Study and reading occurred softly by lamplight or hearth. Conversations reinforced the lessons of the day. Children internalized the town's values in rhythm, tone, and pattern, learning to align their actions with the unhurried pace around them. The expectations of children in such towns were not imposed forcefully. They were absorbed through consistent modeling, gentle guidance, repetition, and observation. Every action, word, and gesture contributed to an understanding of patience, quiet responsibility, and deliberate action. The town, in its calm consistency, became both classroom and teacher. By nightfall, children rested, having experienced a day full of learning, play, and responsibility. The town's rhythm was internalized, the lessons of quiet expectation absorbed. Movement, conversation, work, and play had all followed the same steady cadence. Children had learned that patience, observation, and careful action were valued more than speed, drama, or immediate reward. In these small towns, children learned not only academics, but life itself. Quiet expectations guided their actions, conversations, and habits. Routines were predictable, but not oppressive. Instruction was consistent, but not hurried. Life was unremarkable, slow, and steady, and in this way, children grew into adults capable of maintaining the town's enduring rhythm of calm, measured living. As the sun shifted slowly westward, casting longer shadows across the streets and fields, the town's rhythm transitioned once more. The gentle pause of midday gradually gave way to steady movement. Work resumed, though never hurried, measured always by habit and necessity. The day's labor in small towns of 19th century America unfolded in its own deliberate cadence, guided as much by quiet observation as by instruction. Households moved through routine tasks with calm efficiency. Washing, tidying, and mending occupied many hands. Laundry hung on lines, drying in the warm breeze. Water drawn earlier in the day was now employed in these domestic chores. Children carried baskets, carefully balancing folded clothes or small bundles of food. Parents moved alongside them, demonstrating the slow, methodical motions required to complete each task fully and correctly. Errands became part of the town's gentle rhythm. Trips to the general store or blacksmith were neither hurried nor panicked. A basket of goods was carried across streets that were dusted lightly by wind or shaded under buildings. Each step was deliberate, ensuring balance, avoiding unnecessary exertion. Conversations with shopkeepers or neighbors remained calm. Exchanges precise but soft, never urgent. Tradespeople resumed labor with attention to detail rather than speed. Carpenters measured wood carefully, ensuring accuracy before each cut. Blacksmiths tended fires, waiting patiently for coals to reach the correct temperature before striking iron. Hammers, chisels, and saws moved in patterns repeated countless times, practiced and familiar. Apprentices observed silently, learning not through instruction alone, but by absorbing the measured rhythm of adults at work. The town's animals, too, followed the pace of labor. Horses, cattle, and pigs were tended with care, each movement deliberate. Feeding, watering, and grooming were performed methodically. Children and adults alike learned to anticipate the needs of animals, to move with gentle authority, and to respect the unhurried pace demanded by life in a rural setting. Even the animals seemed to settle into this rhythm, moving with the same slow cadence that defined the town. Errands beyond the immediate household often required planning. Trips to the mill, the bakery, or the farrier were anticipated in advance. Routes were familiar, distances measured in experience rather than on a clock. Each errand was approached without haste. Time was not a constraint. The task itself dictated the pace. Children might accompany adults, observing the slow management of provisions, absorbing lessons in navigation, negotiation, and steady work. Some residents traveled slightly farther, delivering goods, tending nearby fields, or attending to external trades. Carts and wagons moved at an unhurried pace. Horses walked steadily, their hooves producing rhythmic sounds that blended with the soft murmur of town life. Travelers paused occasionally, adjusting loads, checking harnesses, and ensuring the day's efforts could continue without strain. Each movement was intentional, part of the larger cadence of labor and life. In homes where meals were prepared for later, the afternoon provided time to gather ingredients, cook slowly over fire or stove, and ensure that food would be ready when the family reconvened. Even preparation followed a deliberate rhythm. Chopping vegetables, kneading dough, or stirring porridge was done with care, hand movements steady, deliberate, purposeful. Every motion was efficient in its calm, measured way. Children's roles in afternoon tasks continued the lessons of the morning. They assisted in cooking, sweeping, and tidying. They learned to handle tools gently, to balance weight, and to move with precision. Every action was observed, every repetition absorbed. In this way, the town nurtured competence, patience, and self-awareness from the earliest hours of life. Trades such as blacksmithing, carpentry, shoemaking, and weaving continued steadily. Each step of labor had been practiced countless times. Hammers rose and fell, saws cut with care, needles moved with precision, looms shifted slowly but consistently. Apprentices mirrored the patterns of adults, learning the steady rhythm of production. Efficiency was measured not by haste, but by careful completion, the accuracy of work, and the preservation of tools and materials. Errands that required interaction between households or tradespeople were similarly calm. Deliveries of flour, butter, eggs, or cloth were conducted methodically. Exchanges involved soft, measured speech, acknowledgement of the receiver, and careful handling of goods. There was no need for fanfare or speed. The emphasis rested on accuracy, reliability, and respect for the town's rhythm. Even repair work followed a deliberate pace. Roofs were mended slowly, shingles replaced one by one, fences were repaired section by section, posts checked for stability. Tools rested between tasks, handled carefully to prevent damage. The town's inhabitants understood that steady labor produced lasting results, while rushed work created more problems than it solved. By mid-afternoon, the streets were dotted with steady movement. Farmers returned from fields with produce, tradespeople walked slowly between workshops, and children carried messages or items for their families. Conversations were calm, purposeful, and brief. Words were exchanged to facilitate work, never hurried, never forced. Silence remained just as meaningful as speech. Even leisure followed a subdued rhythm. Some residents paused briefly to sit under trees, rest on benches, or watch the activity around them. Children, if not occupied with tasks, played quietly nearby. Shadows grew long, the sun began its descent, and the town continued its slow, methodical pulse. Mail, news, and messages moved through the town with similar care. Letters were delivered gently, newspapers folded carefully, and information exchanged without hurry. Residents read with measured attention, absorbing news without excitement or urgency. Even gossip, when shared, was soft-spoken, delayed by consideration, and received without reactionary haste. Community projects and cooperative tasks adhered to the same slow pace. Repairs to communal structures, maintenance of roads, or shared labor in gardens and fields progressed steadily. Each participant contributed at a pace that ensured accuracy and minimized fatigue. The town's rhythm encouraged collaboration, attentiveness, and calm diligence. Afternoon tasks often provided the most concentrated lessons in observation for children and apprentices. Watching adults measure twice before cutting, adjust harnesses carefully, or handle livestock gently, they absorbed not only the technical skills, but the underlying principle, the value of patience, and the importance of deliberate, unhurried action. The town's quiet rhythm allowed for reflection. Residents observed the work of others, noted patterns, and considered improvements without stress. Even small errors were corrected methodically. Learning occurred continuously, though invisibly. The pace permitted absorption, understanding, and refinement. Work became not only labor, but instruction in the rhythm of life itself. By late afternoon, the day's labor began winding toward conclusion. Tasks left incomplete were assessed, tools prepared for the next day, and preparations made for evening meals and rest. Even as energy waned, movements remained deliberate. There was no rush to finish. Completion was measured in thoroughness and correctness, not in speed. Horses were fed and watered, fields inspected, carts returned, and workspaces tidied. Domestic chores were repeated to ensure readiness for the next day. Families and workers moved at a pace that allowed recovery and reflection. Conversations were calm, instructions repeated gently, and children observed carefully, internalizing the lessons of steady labor. As shadows lengthened further, the town transitioned into evening. Yet the afternoon's steady rhythm left a lasting imprint. Work had been completed thoughtfully, errands conducted without urgency, and learning absorbed in repetition and observation. The day had followed a deliberate cadence, reinforcing values of patience, consistency, and measured action. The lessons of the afternoon were subtle but enduring. Children and adults alike learned that work could be performed efficiently without haste, that errands could be completed reliably without stress, and that life itself followed a rhythm best respected rather than resisted. By the time the sun dipped low, the town was ready to shift again toward rest, reflection, and the quiet conclusion of a day that had moved neither hurriedly nor dramatically, but steadily, gently, and deliberately. In this manner, afternoons in small towns shaped the lives of residents. Labor, errands, and tasks became exercises in patience, careful observation, and quiet endurance. There was no excitement, no urgency, no pressure. Only the calm, predictable rhythm of daily life, unfolding slowly, steadily, and unremarkably. And in that, entirely perfect.
As the sun sank lower in the sky, casting elongated shadows over the streets and fields, the town moved into its evening rhythm. The day's work gradually concluded, and households transitioned into quiet routines that balanced labor, reflection, and preparation for the night. The pace remained deliberate, calm, and measured, each action unfolding naturally, without hurry. In homes across the town, evening chores began in a gentle cadence. Children carried water from wells, careful not to spill the contents. while older family members swept floors, washed dishes, and tidied rooms. Each motion was practiced and deliberate, repeated often enough to require little thought. The tasks themselves served as a quiet conclusion to the day, signaling the transition from active labor to the calmer evening hours. Laundry, if not completed in the morning or early afternoon, was tended at this time as well. Clothes were wrung, hung, or folded with patient hands. Even minor details, such as smoothing wrinkles or securing buttons, were executed methodically. The process reinforced careful observation and patience. No rush existed, and no one demanded perfection beyond what could be achieved with steady effort. In the kitchens, fires burned low or were stoked as needed for supper. Meals were prepared slowly, with care and attention to detail. Ingredients were measured, mixed, and cooked over open flames or stoves, the aroma rising gently into the household. Children and apprentices assisted where necessary, learning the methods and pace of preparation through quiet observation. In this unhurried environment, every step was instructional, embedding knowledge and patience alongside sustenance. Animals were tended one last time before nightfall. Horses were fed and watered, barns secured, and livestock checked to ensure safety through the evening. Children participated, learning responsibility, timing, and the quiet satisfaction of completing necessary tasks. Every motion was deliberate, steady, and meaningful, reinforcing lessons in attention and care. Around the town, small trades wrapped up their work as well. Blacksmiths cooled fires, carefully storing tools and materials for the following day. Carpenters cleared benches and organized wood, ensuring nothing was misplaced or damaged overnight. Shopkeepers tidied counters, straightened shelves, and accounted for the day's transactions with slow, methodical precision. The rhythm of labor carried the lessons of diligence into the night. Conversations in the evening followed the same measured pace. Families gathered at tables or near hearths. Words were quiet, deliberate, and reflective. Discussions touched on the day's events, tasks completed, minor observations, and simple plans for the following day. There was no urgency, no emotion required exaggeration. The purpose of conversation was connection, observation, and reflection, softly spoken, yet meaningful. Children's roles during this time emphasized continuity and learning. They practiced skills, assisted adults, and participated in family routines. Even play was subdued, brief, and gentle, allowing for reflection and the development of patience. Stories were told slowly, often repeated, reinforcing memory, moral lessons, or town history. The evening became a time for instruction embedded in daily life, unhurried and calm. By late evening, households settled into a quieter tempo. Lamps or candles were lit carefully, casting warm, soft light over rooms and tasks. The pace of work had fully transitioned into reflection and preparation for rest. People moved deliberately, each motion intentional, aligning with the overall rhythm of the day. Nothing was rushed. Silence carried as much weight as speech. Reflective activities were common. Adults reviewed ledgers, wrote letters, or prepared tools for the following day. Children read from books, practiced writing, or engaged in quiet observation of the adults' work. Learning was reinforced in subtle ways. The town's rhythm of steady labor, deliberate tasks, and calm reflection continued to permeate all actions.
In homes where religious or spiritual practice was observed, evenings provided a time for meditation, prayer, or contemplation. Families might read scripture aloud, reflect on teachings, or simply sit in quiet acknowledgement of the day's completion. These practices were calm and deliberate, without urgency, and often provided a sense of closure and mental repose before sleep. Neighborhood interactions in the evening were similarly measured. Short visits, polite exchanges, or brief gatherings occurred with soft words and slow movements. Conversations were reflective, often repeating small stories, observations, or lessons learned during the day. Social interaction maintained the town's rhythm, connecting households while preserving calm and patience. Even chores that seemed minor contributed to the evening's pattern. Sweeping porches, tidying outdoor spaces, and preparing tools and materials for morning were all executed deliberately. Every task reinforced the principle of slow, steady effort. Repetition became the mechanism for skill, understanding, and continuity. The day's labor concluded without spectacle, without rush, in the soft comfort of routine. By the time night deepened, families gathered for final meals or simple conversations. Food was consumed slowly, with attention to taste, nourishment, and companionship. Words were measured. Laughter was soft. The home became a place of gentle closure, transitioning naturally from labor to rest. Children prepared for bed with careful attention. Clothing was adjusted, beds arranged, and small personal items organized. The process was methodical, teaching responsibility and reinforcing the day's lessons in attention and routine. Parents observed calmly, guiding with soft words and subtle instruction. Each action emphasized preparation and reflection over speed or excitement. The final moments of the day involved quiet reflection. Adults considered accomplishments, noted minor errors, and planned future tasks. Children absorbed these observations indirectly, learning the rhythms and values of town life. Reflection became a key part of the daily cycle, reinforcing calm awareness, patience, and understanding. It emphasized thoughtfulness over immediacy, stillness over urgency. Evening activities sometimes included soft storytelling, sharing local history, or recounting events from the town. These narratives unfolded slowly, with repetition and emphasis on detail. Children learned facts, ethics, and lessons indirectly through the unhurried telling. Adults reinforced community values, personal responsibility, and calm reflection, all through the simple act of measured communication. Throughout the town, the pace of life in the evening reinforced continuity. Houses, shops, and trades were aligned in rhythm with family routines, domestic work, and reflection. Observers would note the unhurried nature of each task, each conversation, and each movement. Life was steady, deliberate, and quiet, a consistent cadence that defined the town's character. As lamps dimmed and the last movements of the day concluded, a sense of completeness settled over the town. The steady rhythm of chores, reflection, and family life had carried residents through the afternoon into evening. There was satisfaction in completion, tranquility in preparation, and comfort in routine. Nothing had been rushed, everything unfolded in accordance with the town's measured pace. Finally, night embraced the town. Families retreated to beds, children to slumber, adults to rest. Tasks had been completed thoughtfully, lessons absorbed naturally, and routines followed without pressure. The unhurried day had come full circle, carrying each resident through labor, reflection, and quiet companionship. In this way, evenings reinforced the town's values: patience, calm diligence, quiet observation, and deliberate action. Life moved steadily, peacefully, without excitement or urgency. Each day's conclusion was both functional and reflective, preparing residents to awaken and continue the slow, measured rhythm that defined small-town America in the 19th century. The evening, like every other part of the day, existed without drama. It was ordinary, unremarkable, and steady. Yet in its simplicity, it held the lessons of life, the value of care, the importance of reflection, and the gentle continuity of daily existence. Life in its slow unfolding was complete, harmonious, and quietly perfect.
As darkness settled over the town, a calm quietness enveloped every street, field, and building. Nightfall was not abrupt, but a slow, gentle transition marked by the fading of sunlight, the cooling of air, and the soft dimming of activity. Shadows lengthened, becoming indistinct in the lantern glow or fading to black beneath rooftops. The town exhaled after a day of measured labor, reflection, and quiet activity. Houses became small islands of light in the growing darkness. Inside, families moved with deliberate care, finishing the final tasks of the day. Doors were secured, fires banked or extinguished, and lamps trimmed to produce gentle illumination rather than harsh glare. Movements were slow, purposeful, almost ritualistic, signaling the transition from wakefulness to rest. Even the soft creaking of floorboards and doors carried a rhythm in tune with the evening's calm. Children, having completed chores and lessons, prepared for bed with careful attention. Clothing was arranged, beds straightened, and blankets folded over mattresses. Little hands moved deliberately, repeating familiar motions that had been practiced daily. Parents supervised gently, ensuring that preparation was thorough yet unhurried. Each step reinforced habits of responsibility, patience, and self-reliance. Sleep itself became an anticipated natural event. Beds were modest but comfortable, filled with the warmth of quilts and blankets. Children climbed in slowly, taking their positions with care, settling under covers that had been straightened to avoid discomfort. Adults followed similar routines, mindful of posture, comfort, and warmth. The quiet of the house provided a natural lull, inviting bodies and minds to rest in harmony with the town's rhythm. Outside, streets emptied gradually. Any remaining footsteps were soft, deliberate, and transient. Animals in barns or pastures became still, responding to dimming light and falling temperatures. The wind moved gently through trees and over rooftops, producing subtle sounds that seemed to echo the day's quietude. Even nature conspired to guide the town into rest, reinforcing patterns of stillness and calm. The passage of time during nightfall was subtle and unhurried. Without clocks demanding attention, residents gauged hours by the diminishing light, the position of stars, and the natural cues of darkness. This organic sense of time encouraged reflection, patience, and alignment with daily cycles. Moments were neither lost nor hurried, simply experienced as part of a continuous, measured flow. Families engaged in quiet activities before sleep. Some read aloud, their voices soft and steady. Others mended clothing or small items by lamplight, motions precise, movements slow. Children listened and observed, absorbing not only the content of the stories or tasks, but the deliberate, unhurried manner in which they were delivered. Reflection was woven into these activities, reinforcing lessons learned throughout the day. Even casual conversation adhered to the town's rhythm. Voices were gentle, deliberate, and measured. Words were chosen carefully, with pauses allowing absorption and consideration. Stories of daily events, minor observations, or shared memories were delivered softly, without urgency, drama, or excitement. The purpose was connection, understanding, and calm reflection rather than entertainment or persuasion. In some homes, prayers or moments of meditation marked the close of the day. Families observed these rituals quietly, reading from texts or speaking simple words of reflection. Silence was just as meaningful as speech. Children learned to value the space between words, the pause for thought, and the calm assurance of routine. These moments reinforced continuity, grounding the day in tranquility and reflection. Nightfall also allowed for anticipation of the next day. Tasks left incomplete were considered, plans reviewed gently, and preparations imagined without urgency. Adults reflected on work accomplished, minor corrections to make, and opportunities for teaching children through example. This reflection was quiet, methodical, and free of stress, reinforcing the measured pace that defined life in the town. The subtle passage of time during night was mirrored in the natural world. Crickets and other insects produced gentle, rhythmic sounds. Leaves rustled softly in the breeze. Occasionally, a distant animal might call, but these sounds were unhurried, blending into the steady, calm backdrop of the night. Residents absorbed these cues unconsciously, reinforcing a connection to the natural rhythm surrounding them. Sleep unfolded naturally. Children drifted into dreams slowly, lulled by warmth, calm voices, and familiarity. Adults rested nearby, aware of tasks completed, lessons absorbed, and routines maintained. The quiet night reinforced continuity, linking the day's labor, reflection, and instruction to the restorative process of sleep. Time moved gently, without urgency, preparing all for the next measured day.
In some households, the night also provided time for private reflection. Adults considered minor decisions, assessed personal progress, or simply observed the quiet of the town from windows or porches. These reflections were deliberate, slow, and methodical, reinforcing self-awareness, responsibility, and patience. Even solitude was productive, supporting the rhythm of daily life. The transition from evening to night demonstrated continuity. Tasks were complete, lessons absorbed, and family routines observed. The town's inhabitants experienced the day's conclusion not as abrupt cessation, but as a gentle, predictable shift. Movement slowed, voices softened, and minds unwound. Each household mirrored this transition, creating a collective rhythm across the community. Nightfall also reinforced security. Doors were locked, animals secured, and preparations made to prevent disruption. These actions were deliberate and calm, not hurried or panicked. Residents understood that safety was maintained through attention, consistency, and careful observation rather than haste. This practice reinforced a sense of order and tranquility, allowing sleep to proceed undisturbed. The passage of time was subtle, unmarked by urgency or alarm. Stars rose slowly, the moon followed its measured path, and the town's quiet continued uninterrupted. Residents rested in alignment with these natural rhythms, internalizing patterns of calm, reflection, and steady living. The night became a mirror of the day, deliberate, gentle, and continuous. Children awoke briefly, occasionally, only to resettle in blankets. Parents observed quietly, maintaining the calm, steady environment. Every movement reinforced the town's values: patience, observation, and deliberate action. Sleep was both restorative and instructive, teaching the body and mind the rhythm of unhurried existence. Even in dreams, the patterns of daily life persisted subtly. The repetition of tasks, the cadence of conversation, the steady flow of labor, and the gentle rhythm of reflection remained embedded in consciousness. By morning, these lessons were absorbed, ready to be applied in the next day's measured cycle. The town, as it rested, existed in balance with itself and with the natural world. Each house, street, and field aligned with the steady rhythm of nightfall. Every resident participated unconsciously in the continuity of life: labor, reflection, learning, and rest, each linked in a cycle that emphasized calm, deliberation, and the gentle passage of time. As night deepened, the sounds of the town diminished. Even the occasional movement, a door closing, a floorboard creaking, a quiet footstep, was absorbed into the overall rhythm. Silence was active, meaningful, and instructive. Residents slept, dreamed, and restored their energy without rush, anxiety, or excitement, guided entirely by the natural cadence of life. By the earliest hours before dawn, the town had settled fully into stillness. Time moved subtly, unnoticed yet continuous. The passage of night prepared every resident for the next cycle, linking labor, observation, reflection, and rest into a seamless, unhurried pattern. The rhythm of the day, now complete, persisted quietly in the structures, streets, and people of the town. Nightfall, rest, and the subtle passage of time became as important as any task accomplished in daylight. They taught patience, reinforced reflection, and provided continuity. Life in the town moved steadily, deliberately, and without urgency. Even the smallest actions, sounds, and movements contributed to the enduring rhythm of existence. In this unhurried night, the town learned again the value of quiet continuity. Time was neither lost nor rushed. Tasks completed, lessons absorbed, conversations had, and reflection undertaken, all flowed into rest, awaiting the morning's renewal. Life in this 19th century town was defined by steady rhythm, deliberate action, and the gentle, subtle passage of time, an enduring pattern that shaped every waking and sleeping hour.
The town, having moved through the steady rhythm of morning, midday, afternoon, and evening, now settled fully into rest. Darkness enveloped streets, fields, and buildings alike. Windows reflected faint lamplight, but the majority of the town lay in shadow. Even the smallest movement, from a horse shifting in a barn to a floorboard creaking in a quiet home, blended into the overall hush that defined the night. Families lay in their beds, enveloped in warmth, blankets drawn, bodies still. Children slept beside parents or siblings, their breaths even and slow. Adults rested nearby, aware of the day's work, but unhurried by urgency or concern. In each household, there was a sense of completion. Tasks had been performed thoughtfully. Lessons had been absorbed. Meals had been prepared and consumed. Work, reflection, and care had all reached their natural conclusion. Outside, the town itself seemed to breathe softly. Trees swayed gently in a cool night breeze. Animals settled into barns and pastures, their movements minimal, attentive yet calm. Even the river at the town's edge moved quietly, reflecting moonlight without hurry. The town's boundaries, streets, and homes all participated in the same measured pace, a silent chorus of rest that enveloped the community. The rhythm of daily life had been absorbed into every action, every motion, every thought. Residents had moved deliberately through chores, errands, study, reflection, and play. Conversations were soft and unhurried. Children had learned the steady cadence of work and learning. Adults had reflected on tasks completed and considered plans for the future. Each day reinforced patience, observation, and thoughtful action. Sleep itself became a continuation of this rhythm. Breaths deepened, limbs relaxed. The mind, having moved through the gentle motions of daily life, followed the same pace into dreams. Night provided restoration, allowing both body and mind to absorb lessons, consolidate skills, and replenish energy. The town rested, not hurried, not restless, but in a steady, deliberate calm that had defined its inhabitants for generations. Even in the quietest moments, subtle instruction continued. Children, learning through observation, absorbed patterns of behavior. Adults, through reflection, reinforced knowledge and understanding. Repetition of the day's routines, combined with the restful calm of night, ensured that the town's rhythm persisted beyond conscious thought. Life itself was a teacher, guiding without force, instructing without urgency. The passage of hours was measured only by natural cues, the slow rise and fall of the moon, the gentle cooling of the night air, and the quiet sounds of distant animals. Without clocks dictating urgency, residents internalized the day's lessons in timing and patience. Moments were neither wasted nor rushed. They existed as part of an unbroken cycle of deliberate, gentle motion. In the deepest hours, the town seemed suspended. Streets were empty, shops closed, fires extinguished. Even the occasional footsteps of an early riser moving through a quiet home became a rhythmic part of the overall stillness. Silence was not empty, but active, filled with the cumulative experiences of labor, reflection, and calm observation. Every resident participated, even unconsciously, in maintaining this gentle, unhurried order. Families awoke gradually, only to anticipate the next day's repetition of this steady pattern. Children would rise to participate in chores, lessons, and errands. Adults would resume work, reflection, and instruction.
Each day flowed seamlessly from the last, guided by the same unhurried principles that had defined generations before. The town's continuity depended not on haste or spectacle, but on patience, deliberation, and measured engagement. Even in the smallest sounds contributed to this rhythm, a rooster crowing faintly before dawn, the soft rustle of leaves in a breeze, or the quiet shift of livestock. These movements were neither intrusive nor alarming. They marked the gentle passage of time, anchoring the residents to the natural cycles that governed life. Observation of these details reinforced awareness, care, and patience in both children and adults alike. By sunrise, the cycle would begin again. Morning chores, preparation, study, and labor, each step executed with deliberate attention. The day would unfold according to its familiar rhythm, neither hurried nor interrupted. Lessons from previous days, the importance of reflection, care, patience, and steady effort would carry forward naturally, embedded in each action, thought, and movement. The town in this way existed as a continuous pattern of life, measured, calm, and deliberate. Each day built upon the last, and each night provided the restorative pause necessary to maintain balance. The flow of labor, study, reflection, and rest created an enduring rhythm, one that shaped not only the present, but the development of the town's children and the continuation of its culture. Even in the smallest households, the effects of this rhythm were evident. Children learned skills not by demand, but by gentle observation. Adults honed habits through repetition, reflection, and careful planning. The town itself, as a whole, maintained a cohesion rooted in steady practice, quiet communication, and deliberate pacing. Life moved without urgency, drama, or distraction, and in this careful flow it thrived. Night, like all parts of the day, was ordinary in its simplicity, yet extraordinary in its consistency. It reinforced values, behaviors, and lessons absorbed throughout hours of labor and reflection. It encouraged patience, steadiness, and attention to detail. Residents, enveloped in quiet and warmth, moved toward sleep with calm assurance, ready to continue the measured rhythm when dawn arrived. The subtle passage of time, unmarked by alarm or urgency, provided perspective. Life was not a series of dramatic events, but a slow, deliberate unfolding of tasks, observation, and reflection. Each moment contributed to continuity, stability, and personal growth. The town's character was defined not by spectacle, but by the seamless pattern of ordinary days, each concluded with the calm of night and preparation for renewal. As the final hours of darkness stretched toward dawn, the town rested entirely. Households were quiet, streets empty, and nature moved gently through the nocturnal hours. Sleep completed its work, restoring bodies and minds alike. The rhythm of the day, now complete, remained imprinted in memory, ready to guide each resident once more. In conclusion, the life of this small 19th-century American town was defined by deliberate action, patient observation, and calm reflection. Each day unfolded with steady rhythm, morning labor, midday pause, afternoon tasks, evening reflection, and night rest. The subtle passage of time, measured not by urgency but by careful attention to detail, bound the community together
and shaped generations. A day concluded in quiet completeness. The town rested, not hastily or anxiously, but in harmony with itself and with the natural cycles that governed life. In this measured, calm, and enduring rhythm, the town found its balance, its continuity, and its quiet perfection.